has consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. This week, we have a unique opportunity to reduce the deficit to the tune of $2.2 trillion. That's $2.2 billion to protect Medicare, to protect Social Security, to protect Medicaid, and to make sure the United States of America doesn't do something we've never done, that's go into default. We can debate how we got here. We can debate why we have this huge budget deficit. We can debate whether it's Barack Obama's fault or George Bush's fault. We can debate whether it's the Recovery Act or whether it was the two wars that President Bush didn't pay for. We can debate whether it's the health care bill or whether it's the bailout to the drug and insurance company, the health care bill of President Obama's, or the giveaway to the drug and insurance companies that President Bush did in the name of Medicare privatization. We can talk about President Bush's tax cuts. We can do any of that, but we can't debate. It's not a question of debate the urgency of this situation. Never before has the full faith and credit of the United States of America been held hostage to a major budget agreement. In the past 3 decades before President Obama, so let's take him out of this picture for a minute. In the past 3 decades before President Obama, we've avoided default by raising the debt limit 38 times. 38 times in the last 30 years before President Obama. 34 of those times, almost 90%, were under Republican presidents. 34 out of 38 times we did it were under Republican presidents. We didn't do a hostage-taking. We didn't try to scare people. We simply, even if we didn't like doing it, we simply raised the debt ceiling. So as I and many of my Democratic colleagues have said, we can balance the budget as we did under President Clinton. I came to office in 1992 in the House. I voted for a controversial budget. No Republicans joined us. We had 8 years of economic growth, almost 8 years of economic growth, 21 million net private sector jobs created, and we got to a balanced budget. We know how to do that. We do it with a balance between spending cuts and revenues, especially closing tax loopholes, giveaways to the oil companies, tax breaks for companies that outsource jobs, tax breaks for hedge fund operators on Wall Street. We can close those tax loopholes. We can do spending cuts, and we can do what we need to do to move towards a balanced budget. It's especially unfortunate that during those 38 times there was a freestanding vote. Each time it was raised, there was a freestanding vote. Neither party played these games. Neither party held our nation hostage to these political games. But rather than a freestanding vote on the debt limit, we're in a last-minute scramble. Democrats have said, okay, we'll reach an agreement. Never has one party insisted that the amount of the increase in the debt limit be offset by an equal amount of spending cuts. But we've even agreed, Mr. President, to that approach. Never before has one party insisted that a major budget agreement exclude provisions that address revenue. We've even said yes to that, Mr. President. And now, having had their demands met, the people in the party who insisted on all these conditions are saying no. They are saying no again. The debate on the debt and the deficit has been complicated, it's been contentious, it's been angry. But a default should be unimaginable. A default should be unimaginable. A default would risk what would amount to a permanent tax hike. I hear many of the radicals in the House of Representatives who say they'll never vote for a debt increase as if it's something that we should never, ever, ever do in a country. They all talk about tax cuts, but you know, a default on the part of the United States of America would amount to a permanent tax hike on all Americans. Interest rates would rise for anyone owning a home, paying a home mortgage, applying for a home mortgage, anyone with a car loan, anyone with a college loan. Credit costs for all borrowers would climb, governments at every level, businesses, nonprofits, small businesses, large businesses, credit card holders. There'd be repercussions for pension funds and money market funds that guard the retirement savings of middle-class families. So basically everybody in the presiding officer's home state of Minnesota, in my state of Ohio, everybody would be afflicted with this tax increase, if you will, from higher interest rates. Several states have already been placed on a credit watch. Every state would be hurt by a federal default, which is why governors of both parties are saying, make a deal, get to this. This is not alarmist thinking. There's a reason Ronald Reagan went to Congress 18 times to raise the debt ceiling. Here's what he said. President Reagan said, "The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default," that's where we are right now, in a serious prospect of a default, "by the United States of America are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States of America would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and the value of the dollar." End of quote, Mr. President. We don't know. None of us is being alarmist because we really don't know, but we know that people whom most Americans respect, President Reagan, President Clinton, others who have asked for a debt ceiling increase, economists, business people, we know that nobody knows for sure what would happen, but nobody's ever wanted to take that risk. We've always paid our bills. Default could affect Ohioans receiving Medicare and Social Security. It could affect veterans in hospitals and universities. President Obama has said that he can't guarantee payments to senior citizens, to bondholders, to other obligations of the United States of America. You cannot, Mr. President, you cannot fake cash flow. These are real consequences when it comes to jobs, to seniors living on fixed income. In the midst of an economic growth as fragile as is ours, lawmakers ought to just suspend their politics. Today, the harm of inaction would be immense. President Obama put several proposals forward to reduce the deficit in a big way, modeled after these bipartisan commissions where there's been pretty good bipartisan agreements. But efforts to forge a grand compromise, bringing the deficit down by $4 trillion, have been abandoned by Republican leaders over and over. I have not supported every detail in these grand compromise efforts. I don't want to do anything to undermine Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid, programs that have worked for generations now, and programs that millions of Ohioans depend on, from Middletown to Ashtabula, from Toledo to Athens and Gallipolis. That's because I wanted a more balanced approach. I know the presiding officer did too. But as days and weeks and months go by, we're now only days away from default. We're simply running out of time. That's what the Senate bill is about, protecting us from default. The spirit of continued compromise, again, the majority leader has come forth with a plan to reduce the deficit by $2.2 trillion. It's truly a compromise because it meets the Republicans' main criteria. It contains spending cuts to roughly match the debt ceiling increase through 2012. The spending cuts in the Reid plans are ones that Republicans have agreed to. It contains no revenue increases. All three of those have been what Republicans asked for, but now it's not good enough. What do they want to do when we've basically met their demands? Beyond all that, this compromise that we have offered, mostly what they've asked for, contains an important priority of mine, not one of the Republicans, to be sure, and that is that we protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I know that major Republican budgets, the Ryan budget, the so-called Ryan budget, the Republican House budget, it undercut our major important programs, Medicare and Medicaid especially. We know that the so-called cut, cap, and balance proposal that the Republicans have passed that is being voted on here, that those didn't protect Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. So we know Republicans want to go after those programs. Under this compromise, we've been able to protect that. But, Mr. President, we need to make sure that we put country ahead of party, national interests above partisanship. That's why we've been willing to compromise. Speaker Boehner's plan is being revised, but so far it provides significantly less than the savings of the Reid proposal. By design, the Boehner plan would put us back in this situation in a few months. What rational economist, what responsible elected official, what business person in St. Paul or Columbus, in Rochester or Mansfield, what business person would say, let's put the United States of America in this situation again in 6 months? We know what's happened in this country in the last month or so. As we approach default, as the public, as the businesses particularly watch the way this is being debated and how this is being handled, People are way less certain. People are way more concerned about our ability to raise the debt ceiling and keep us out of default. Businesses are holding on to their cash reserves because they're not willing to invest now because they don't want this to happen. So why do we want to go through this again in 6 months, Mr. President? Why would we possibly think this is a good thing for the United States of America, for people in Chillicothe and Dayton, in Youngstown and Akron and Canton and Kenton, in Wauseon and Bowling Green? Why would we want businesses and our country to go through this again in 6 months? We need to get this done with. We've got to raise the debt ceiling, keep us out of default. We need to make sure that we focus on deficit reduction, and we need to put our efforts into job creation. People all over my state, when I'm in Dayton, when I'm in Springfield, when I'm in Cuyahoga County or Mahoning County, as I was those two counties this last weekend, people are talking they want us to focus on job growth. We need to do budget cuts. We need to raise the debt ceiling, keep us out of default. We mostly need to make sure that we move forward on job creation. We prevent a default. It reduces the deficit with the READ plan, a critical imperative for our children, our grandchildren. It protects Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. My office, Mr. President, is being swamped with calls and emails from Ohioans who simply can't believe we're this close to default. Within the week, Congress must pass, the President must sign an increase in the debt ceiling. It's essential if we want to prevent an absolutely unnecessary, an absolutely uncalled for, yet catastrophic default. It's necessary to move on to address the issues of jobs. Too many recent college graduates, too many people have been in the workforce for many years. Too many of our people are unemployed and looking for jobs. That's where our focus needs to be. We need to pass the READ plan, work on deficit reduction, and focus on job creation. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
recognized.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I think many of my colleagues have, to speak to the topic at hand, which is the debt ceiling debate that we're having here in the Congress of the United States. And I got to tell you, I think the Americans across the country are looking at us today with disbelief, anxiety, and I think rightly anger. They awoke this morning hoping to find that cooler heads had prevailed and that all of us here were working together on a plan that keeps our country from default and our economy from a looming collapse. And instead, the headlines read that the Speaker of the House was again refusing to negotiate, and that he is in fact delaying action in the House because of Republican upheaval against his own plan. And I have to say, even if the House of Representatives passed a bill preventing default this evening, within hours we'd still be pushing our country right up to the ledge of an economic catastrophe. And in other words, what I'm saying, Mr. President, is that even though economists, market analysts, business leaders, credit rating agencies, world leaders, and the American people are begging us to find an agreement to avoid default on our debt obligations, we're no further along today than we've been in the many weeks we've been debating this issue. Now, I think, as the presiding officer knows, as a former member of the House, I take no pleasure in criticizing the People's House. But it does take two to tango, and when it comes to courting the House of Representatives, it feels like they've got one shoe nailed to the dance floor. And I can't figure out for the life of me what it's going to take to reach an agreement on behalf of the American people. The House of Representatives just can't take yes for an answer. Now, the real problem, at least in my estimation, seems to be that a small group of people are set on running up the political score rather than doing the right thing for our country. And if that's the case, now's the time to finally come to the table. Here is the truth. Many of us here are trying to prevent the economy, our economy, from driving off a cliff, but others seem to be busy cutting the brake lines. And on that point, I was really proud of the Senate and the Democrats and Republicans who came together on the bipartisan Bowles-Simpson Commission and came up with a plan on reducing the deficit. They were willing to be a part of the solution. The Bowles-Simpson Commission recommended taking important but difficult steps to reduce our debt by $4 trillion over the next decade. That plan is the right thing to do for the country, and despite the significant political risks attached to taking those positions, senators in both parties were willing to support it. The House members, on the other hand, when the Fiscal Commission offered them the bipartisan deficit reduction plan, they walked away. Both Democrats and Republicans, to be fair. But unfortunately, this has become a pattern. When Vice President Joe Biden and House Majority Leader Eric Cantor were close, finally, to reaching an agreement on a deficit reduction plan, it was the House Republicans who walked away. When President Obama and Speaker Boehner sought to strike a grand bargain to do something great for the country, the House walked away. President Obama likened this to being left at the altar, but I can't think of any description for this that's more apt than irresponsible. Now, for my friends and my colleagues who know me, I'm not quick to anger, but I got to say, time isn't our friend here, and we can't delay action any longer. I was pleased to see Senator Alexander, the third-ranking Republican in the Senate, say last night, quote, "What would be best, instead of having a Republican plan competing with a Democratic plan, would be to have the Speaker, Senator Reid, and Senator McConnell recommend to us a single plan." Now, I understand the Senate leaders are speaking frequently, and I have all the faith in the world that the Senate could work this problem out. But that's only half the problem. We need statesmen, we need patriots, we need problem solvers over in the House to emerge. Campaign politics and partisan talking points don't take courage. Now is the time for courage and leadership. And instead of going back to the drawing board on the Boehner plan, we need to refocus our efforts on a plan that meets 3 tests. Such a plan has to, number 1, raise the debt limit to avoid a first-ever federal government default. 2, provide enough certainty to investors that America pay its bills to stave off a downgrade in our credit rating. And 3, reduce the deficit enough that we can begin the hard work to get our fiscal house in order. The Reid plan, in my estimation, achieves each of those goals. Now, I'm disappointed that we couldn't all come together on a larger $4 to $5 trillion deficit reduction package that would be both bipartisan and comprehensive. The Reid plan adequately addresses the most pressing issues that confront us, which are preventing a default and staving off a downgrade in our credit rating. The Boehner plan, on the other hand, is only a short-term fix, Mr. President, and a host of economic forecasters and business leaders have said it would almost certainly lead to a downgrade in America's credit rating, which would raise interest rates, could sabotage seniors' retirement savings, and increase consumer costs on almost every American. Bank of America, Standard & Poor's, J.P. Morgan Chase, and other major players have all warned us that future economic instability and short-term political solutions will almost certainly lead to a downgrade in our credit rating. That is some serious, serious business, Mr. President. And what's sad about all of this is that the unstable political climate, which one observer called amateur hour on Capitol Hill, itself may lead to a downgrade. Now, I respect the Speaker's desire to go back to the drawing board to try and secure more Republican votes. But the fact of the matter is we don't have time. The Reid plan is ready to go, and it meets the 3-part test that I laid out. And in fact, the Congressional Budget Office stated that the Reid plan reduces the deficit by twice as much as the House Republican plan. And as reported this morning, in the battle of budget scores, the Senate Democrats' deficit reduction bill is the clear winner thus far. Mr. President, our economy has been in critical condition, and I think we're feeling recently that it's beginning to come back to life, that we've been nursing it back to health. And the last thing we need is a self-inflicted heart attack caused by an overdose of partisanship. People wonder why we just can't get it done. I know the presiding officer is a mountain climber, as am I, and we're both, I guess I could say, old mountain climbers in more ways than one. And I can tell you that there's some similarities between attempting to climb the world's highest peaks and our work here in Washington. But the difference seems to be, especially when the going gets tough here on Capitol Hill, is that not only are you trying to conquer mountainous and challenging and difficult terrain, you seem to have a team of saboteurs here who are trying to push the rest of us off the mountain as we're trying to climb it. The Scots have a saying, it isn't the falling off that hurts, it's the sudden stop at the bottom. And I can tell you if we don't raise the debt ceiling, that's going to involve a sudden stop at the bottom for all of us. People of Colorado have told me, and I suspect the rest of the nation feels this way, that they don't care who wins politically. Frankly, I don't care who wins politically either. What I care about is passing legislation that will stave off government default and a downgrade in our nation's credit rating. And at this point, the Reid plan is the only option that meets that criteria. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. Mr. President, as I close, I want to change the tone of my remarks a little bit because there are wonderful people here who work on Capitol Hill and make a difference day in and day out. And I wanted to recognize Hillary Daniels, who's been one of my budget and appropriations legislative assistants, who joined my team when I first came to the Senate 3 years ago. She's a native of Colorado's Western Slope, the great county of Mesa County and the town of Grand Junction. And she's going to be leaving my office next month to go to law school at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She's been an invaluable team member, and I can speak for my entire staff when I say we're both excited for her to take this next step in developing her career, and I'm very grateful for the guidance that she's given me over the last few years. Mr. President, it's for the Hillary Daniels of the world who will be leaders of our country in the next decade and the decade after that that I think we owe an obligation to getting this job done as soon as we possibly can, assuring the markets that the full faith and the credit of the United States will be preserved and protected and nurtured. And, Mr. President, let's turn back to job one here, which is to focus on our economy and job creation. The longer we're stalled out in a political crisis of our own making, the less that we're concerned and focused on putting the American people back to work. Mr. President, thank you for your interest. Thank you for your attention. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. President, I just filed an amendment to S. 1323 to brack the spectrum. This would give us the maximum auction revenue and access to the spectrum for economic development and deficit reduction, and I'm proud to have the amendment endorsed by Americans for Tax Reform. It is very important for the Congress to authorize spectrum incentive auctions. While we should protect broadcasters that choose not to participate in such auctions and their customers that rely on over-the-air broadcast for entertainment and public emergency information, incentive auctions would free up much-needed spectrum for the civilian side and making sure that broadband communications are fully available in the United States. It should be, in short, the policy of the United States to offer the widest amount of broadband spectrum to empower the 21st century economy here. Cell phones were invented in the United States, in fact, mostly in my home state of Illinois, and making sure that this is the country where not just 1G, 2G, and 3G were invented and deployed, but to make sure 5, 6, and 7G are also deployed first in the United States and not in a country like China or India. Now, according to the Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. Treasury has already collected $50 billion in spectrum receipts since 1993. Senator Reid's plan does authorize such auctions, but it's missing a key element to ensure that they are very successful. Unfortunately, like many other agencies in the administration, the Federal Communications Commissions have worked to promulgate regulations that stifle innovation and economic growth. It's important for Congress to prohibit the FCC from establishing new similar rules or conditions that are outside the scope of technical, ethical, or geographic qualifications. Such conditions, for example, the net neutrality provisions, will only serve to depress the market value of the spectrum, therefore decreasing government revenues and lowering our ability to reduce the deficit in this way. Now, one recent study found that Congress has tremendous discretion in the amount of proceeds that it could raise in the exchange for the spectrum, quote, because the amount of money that an auction can raise for the U.S. Treasury and the government is impacted, at least in part, by controllable decisions on how the auction configures the spectrum for sale and the conditions imposed on it. The study analyzed a previous spectrum auction to estimate potential receipts of future auctions based on conditions the FCC may or may not impose. Researchers found that the full auction potential of the broadcast spectrum with no conditions imposed would raise as much as $90 billion, whereas the same auction with heavy and unappealing conditions, such as net neutrality, would only raise $26 billion. That's a difference of $65 billion. We could raise to lower our deficit 250% more in funds with an incentive auction if we ensure that the FCC does not impose market-killing restrictions. Now, my proposal would place limits on the FCC, in addition to establishing the number of other prohibitions to make sure that the FCC doesn't artificially reduce the spectrum value to lower our deficit. The Kirk Amendment would prohibit the FCC from restricting participation, would restrict participants in any auction and from prescribing certain rates and terms and services that may be offered by bidders in order to encourage the most robust participation and license bidding. To avoid future devaluation of spectrum licenses, the amendment would also prohibit the FCC from changing the rules of the game after an auction was completed. Now, by simply selling spectrum voluntarily given up by broadcasters is not enough to solve our credit crunch. We know that wireless subscribership in the United States has increased more than 400% in the last 15 years, and experts expect mobile data traffic to be 35 times higher in 2014 than it was just back in 2009. Yet only 22% of all viable wireless frequencies are licensed for mobile broadband. Industry experts anticipate spectrum will be exhausted in the most populous markets by 2014. Such a restriction then would stunt wireless and other technological development in the United States because we will not have enough bandwidth to continue innovating. Internet service will then slow and calls will be dropped. We should not let this scenario unfold. We should reach our full technological potential because broadband development is a key job creator for the 21st century. Now, according to one estimate, the information and communications industry contributed more than $1.7 trillion to the U.S. gross domestic product in 2009, or over 12% of our total national income. Another study found that broadband provides additional annual consumer benefits of roughly $32 billion per year. It's widely acknowledged that wireless broadband also generates productivity gains of approximately $28 billion annually. And one cost estimate even puts productivity gains for the development and use of wireless broadband at almost $860 billion in 2016. In my own state of Illinois, the study estimates that savings from increased productivity will reach about $5.8 billion in 5 years. This demonstrates that every sector of our economy benefits from wireless development. For example, broadband development will vastly improve health care services for seniors. One study finds that reduced medical costs, reduced cost of institutionalized living, and increased output generated by seniors and individuals who care for them will save about $927 billion between 2005 and 2030. Advancements in wireless technologies aim to reduce the burden on chronically ill by providing remote monitoring of medical functions and to save lives through public safety interoperable networks. Yet very little of this will be achievable unless we make more spectrum available to the civilian sector. Now, not surprisingly, the federal government itself is the largest and most stubborn squatter on the spectrum. According to the Technology Policy Institute, the government currently has exclusive or shared ownership of more than half of the ideal spectrum for wireless development. Much of this spectrum isn't even being used or used efficiently by the government. Unfortunately, it's largely unknown how exactly federal agencies and departments are using the spectrum and which spectrum we could better use on the civilian side. My amendment, in short, would establish a process identical to the successful Base Realignment and Closure Commission to determine which federal spectrum should be offered for sale or shared use by the private sector. While the government has much of this authority, it consistently fails to utilize it. A BRAC-like commission for the spectrum is a key model for its relocation and would help accelerate the development of broadband in the United States without the standard congressional roadblocks that would inhibit development. The amendment also provides assurances that the government will vacate its spectrum once the process is complete, and requires the Office of Management and Budget to intervene in the relocation process if agencies are failing to comply with the relocation plans and penalizing agencies if they don't meet the BRAC timelines. The Kirk Amendment would provide the telecommunications industry with a certain path forward for reliably clear spectrum to advance employment in the United States through wireless advancements. Now, I urge congressional leaders to consider this proposal. It comes from neither Republican nor Democratic side. It is one of the most valuable assets that the government is currently squatting on and could be part of an overall deficit reduction plan totaling upwards of $90 billion. But I think that benefit understates the true potential here. Because if we set a goal of the United States being the country that offers the most broadband wireless spectrum, then we ensure that this critical 21st century industry remain in the United States, and that the pace of innovation in wireless always is fastest in America as opposed to Asia or Europe. That's why I put the administration or the amendment forward, would seek its adoption as part of our deficit negotiations, and with that, Mr. President, would yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. President, may I ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has presented a plan to address our deficits and to end the debt ceiling impasse which threatens to cripple our economy. The Treasury is projected to run out of money next week, and time is running short. Senator Reid has shown great leadership with his pragmatic package. Leader Reid's proposal would give the Treasury the authority to ensure the United States does not default on its debt, while at the same time cutting $2.7 trillion from our budget. The unprecedented set of cuts would have a significant effect in balancing our budget and restoring fiscal sustainability to the federal government. I want to highlight one key thing. Unlike the House Republican budget, and unlike the so-called cut, cap, and balance plan, Leader Reid's plan will preserve Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Protecting Social Security and Medicare benefits is particularly important. The Republicans have long coveted Social Security and wanted to turn it over to Wall Street. George Bush tried and failed to do this because the American people wanted none of it. But they tried. The House Republican budget attacked Medicare, effectively turning it over to the private health insurance industry in 10 years. When the American people found out this was hidden in the Republican budget, they wanted none of it. Huge majorities of the American public disapproved of the Republican budget's attack on Medicare. But instead of relenting, the Republicans came back with cut, cap, and balance. Hidden behind that slogan was an even worse attack on Medicare. The House budget would have raised seniors' costs more than $6,000 a year. Cut, cap, and balance would have gone $2,500 beyond that. Cut, cap, and kill Medicare was a better name for it. Against that relentless Republican effort to go against the will of the American people and kill off Medicare, Leader Reid's proposal protects this vital program and the freedom and security it provides to American families. Now, make no mistake about it, our deficit reduction plan will not be easy. It will cut discretionary spending, by $1.2 trillion over the next decade. These budget reductions will require some tough but necessary choices. The plan would also account for an accelerated wind-down of U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, saving $1 trillion in the process. Our troops in the Middle East deserve our admiration and praise for so successfully carrying out their missions. We must, however, continue to press for a strategy that will bring our troops home as soon as we safely can. The Reid deficit plan would find an additional $40 billion in savings by cutting fraud and abuse in tax compliance and a number of non-defense federal programs, and $60 billion in other savings, including cutting unnecessary spending on agricultural subsidies and auctioning off electromagnetic spectrum that the government currently holds. Finally, by cutting the budget by over $2 trillion, we will have to borrow less money than anticipated, and that will save an additional $400 billion in projected interest costs. In total, the Senate Democratic plan on which we will vote would cut the deficits by $2.7 trillion over the next 10 years. While Senator Reid's proposal would not address the tax gimmicks and loopholes throughout our tax code that help favor the well-connected, this omission does not mean that Democrats have given up on ensuring that there is shared sacrifice as we work to balance the budget. Instead, this package acknowledges the political realities of the moment. Many House Republicans have flatly refused to entertain raising any revenues, not one tax loophole, no cutting of taxpayer subsidies to profitable oil companies, no closing down of offshore tax havens. That is wrong, and the Reid package reserves the tax side of budget reform for another day. We look forward to a robust discussion in the weeks and months ahead over Republican priorities that put special interest loopholes ahead of the interests of American families and ahead of the interests of the American economy. The Reid plan would establish a bipartisan commission to recommend budget changes, whose recommendations would then be guaranteed an up or down vote in both houses of Congress before the end of the year. These recommendations should focus on cutting the unjustifiable tax giveaways, the tax earmarks that allow profitable companies to avoid taxation entirely and permit mega millionaires and billionaires to pay lower effective tax rates than do middle-class families. The Reid plan meets the Republicans' initial demands in the debt ceiling negotiations. It cuts $2.7 trillion from the budget, greater than the amount by which the debt limit would be increased, and leaves tax reform for the next round of budget reform. But it doesn't yield to the Republican attack on Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. I hope that Republicans in the Senate and the House will appreciate the balance of Senator Reid's approach and support it. But what if they don't? The House is in disarray. The Speaker does not appear to have the votes. Some of the extremists won't take yes for an answer, and some of the most extreme appear to relish the prospect of America's economy colliding with the debt ceiling. So let's consider what should occur if Congress fails to lift the debt ceiling. Congress will have sent President Obama 3 different messages, and they create an irreconcilable conflict. Think about it. Message 1 is, we want you to spend money on all these things. We want you to conduct our wars and our national defense. We want you to send out Social Security checks. We want you to pay the doctors in the hospitals who provide Medicare services. We want you to keep guards on our borders and in our prisons, keep air traffic controllers in the towers, run the rest of the federal government. And we tell the president to do that by passing laws. It is by law that the president does these things. Message 2 that we send is, here's the money that we will allow you to collect for the Treasury to pay for all those things. Again, it is by law that we authorize the president to collect that money for the Treasury, by law. There's a slight problem. The things that we've instructed the president to do by law add up to a lot more expense than the money by law we've allowed the executive branch to collect. So the executive branch has had to borrow, and borrow they have, up to $14 trillion. And now, if we don't lift the debt ceiling, we send message 3. Don't borrow anymore. We don't change message 1, and we don't change message 2. We just add message 3. Don't borrow anymore. As anyone can see, there is no way to reconcile those 3 instructions. 1, by law, we tell the executive branch to send out all these checks and make all these payments. 2, by law, we appropriate too little money to pay for what we've told the executive branch to do. And 3, by law, we would tell the executive branch of government they can't borrow the difference. That creates an irreconcilably mixed signal. Do this, but here's not enough money, and don't borrow. This is irresponsible, and it is bad government. If Congress wants to stop paying the troops, stop sending out Social Security checks, shutter agencies of the federal government, or defund Medicare, we should have a proper debate and say so and be responsible for it. But we haven't. And that failure creates an impossible situation for the executive branch under our constitutional principles of separation of powers. Remember why officials in the executive branch pay the soldiers and contractors who support our war efforts. Because Congress has told them to. Congress has the power of the purse. Remember why the executive branch sends out Social Security checks and payments to doctors and hospitals for providing Medicare services. Because Congress has told them to. Congress has the power of the purse. Remember why the President pays the salaries of Border Patrol and prison guards and air traffic controllers and FBI agents and staff in our veterans hospitals. Because Congress has told him to do that. Congress holds the power of the purse. And who's responsible for not giving the President enough money to pay for all of this? For forcing the Treasury to borrow? Congress has set how much the executive branch can collect because Congress has that power of the purse. And now we're telling the President, do all that we have told you to do, but without enough money, and now don't borrow. Well, we all learned in civics class that Congress has the power to make laws and the power of the purse. We learned that the President has the solemn obligation to faithfully execute the laws Congress has passed. That is the basic structure of American government. Outside of a few narrow and specific areas that are assigned exclusively to executive or judicial authority by our Constitution, the constitutional rule is clear. Congress instructs the President by law what to do, and the President faithfully executes those laws. But what happens if Congress won't instruct clearly? What happens under our Constitution when faithfully executing one law Congress has passed requires the President to fail to faithfully execute other laws? How can the President faithfully execute irreconcilably conflicting instructions from Congress? As a matter of constitutional principle, there is only one logical resolution I can see to this constitutional predicament which Congress has created. When the matter is sufficiently grave to merit the President's attention, and when Congress has sent irreconcilable messages for the President to faithfully execute, a zone of executive discretion must necessarily open to allow the President to make the best decisions for the American people in the area where Congress has sent those irreconcilable mixed signals. Of course, the instant that Congress resolves its conflicting signals, the instant that Congress stops speaking out of both sides of its mouth, the instant that Congress sends a clear direction, that zone of executive discretion disappears. Congress has the power here. Congress makes the laws. Congress controls the purse. Whatever fiscal path Congress instructs the President to embark on, he must faithfully execute that instruction from Congress. But Congress can't put the President in the untenable position of having to fail in the faithful execution of one set of laws in order to faithfully execute another. And that's exactly where it seems to me we'd put the President if we failed to lift the debt ceiling. The damage to the country from such a failure would be profound. At least 40 cents of every federal dollar would suddenly stop flowing into the economy. Considering what would have to be done with the remaining 60 cents, it's not very likely that the federal regulatory process would keep running. That means every job in the country, depending on a federal permit or federal approval or a federal grant or a federal contract, would likely grind to a halt. And there'd be a jump in interest rates that would hit federal, state, municipal, corporate, and family budgets. A lot of other stuff might also go wrong, Mr. President, but those three are a bare minimum, and they alone constitute a brutal shock to our struggling economy. The damage would be grave. Bad enough if Congress instructed the President to do this kind of damage. But do we really expect him to do that sort of damage without our clear instruction? The scale of this damage lights up in sharp contrast the constitutional predicament Congress would create through Congress's failure and inaction to send clear direction. The 14th Amendment provisions that the public debt of the United States of America shall not be questioned may or may not be controlling here. That specific amendment is not my point. My point is a more basic one. How, under our separated powers, when Congress gives conflicting directives, does the President faithfully execute those conflicting directives? The conflicting directives problem is ultimately a problem for Congress to solve, but until Congress sorts itself out and gives a clear directive, all that can be constitutionally expected of the President is to do the best he can for the country. He cannot faithfully execute conflicting directives. In a sense, conflicting directives by Congress are a form of abdication by Congress, an abdication of the duty imposed on Congress by Article I of the Constitution to make and pass laws. It is reasonable and proper to infer that the constitutional duty of Congress to make and pass laws implies that the Congress will make and pass laws that are capable of faithful execution by the executive. Mr. President, I'm on my final page. I would ask to extend my remarks for 1 minute with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
The duty of Congress to make and pass laws implies that Congress will make and pass laws capable of faithful execution by the executive. A Congress that cannot meet that standard is in no position to complain that the executive branch has usurped its authority. More to the point, the constitutional cure is always right in Congress's hands. Sort out your differences. Give the executive branch the direction it is Congress's duty to provide. To me, at least, this is a reading of the separation of powers in the United States Constitution that makes sense, that is consistent with the underlying principles of that great document, that is practical and workable, and that allows for governance rather than paralysis in circumstances when congressional dysfunction deprives the President of the clear legislative direction that by clear implication is Congress's duty to provide. I hope, Mr. President, that before we pitch over the looming fiscal precipice, the executive branch gives these views thoughtful consideration, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to address the issue of the impending debt limit. And although the President's speech, his most recent speech on this, did not give me a great cause for confidence, I still hope that he will drop his insistence on a huge tax increase in return for making the meaningful spending cuts and reforms that we need. And I hope, most of all, that he'll drop his opposition to putting our budget on a path to balance. That's the big item that I think we need in this debate. I think we ought to be willing to raise the debt limit, as I am, if, in return for that, we would have the commitment of the President to put us on a path to a balanced budget, as President Clinton committed to and achieved with a Republican Congress back in 1995. So I hope that we will reach an agreement that solves the underlying problem prior to August 2nd. But I'm here this afternoon because I think we all have to acknowledge that we are late in the process, and I think it's indisputable that there is at least a possibility that August 2nd will arrive without having raised the debt ceiling, whatever our personal preferences might be about that. In my view, since that is a possibility, it's essential that the federal government have a plan for what we will do if those circumstances arise. And specifically, what is going to happen is the government will have to spend some period of time, probably a very brief time, but some period of time nevertheless, operating exclusively on the ongoing tax revenue that will be coming in without the ability to go out and borrow additional money. And that means necessarily that somebody is going to make decisions about prioritizing payments by some criteria that somebody is going to come up with. And rather than simply wait and stumble into this period and then discover what somebody has come up with, I think we ought to lay out a plan. And so that is what my recently introduced legislation is meant to do. Now, some of us have been making this argument for a long time. We saw this date coming. We have known for a long time that we would face a difficult time raising this debt ceiling, and it's always been possible that we wouldn't get it done by August 2nd. So I've been arguing that we ought to have this plan. Unfortunately, the administration has persisted in denying that it's even possible to prioritize, which is ridiculous. It's going to happen. And they've persisted in predicting that we're going to default on our bonds if we go past August 2nd without having raised the debt ceiling. In a letter to Congress, Treasury Secretary Geithner said, and I quote, "This would be an unprecedented event in American history. A default would inflict catastrophic, far-reaching damage on our nation's economy." President Obama said in May of this year, if investors around the world thought that the full faith and credit of the United States was not being backed up, if they thought that we might renege on our IOUs, it could unravel the entire financial system. Mr. President, these are scare tactics. These things need not happen. I'm afraid that they're meant to intimidate members of Congress into voting for a debt limit increase without the underlying reforms, spending cuts that the President resists. I think it's irresponsible to make these suggestions because it's entirely within the power of the administration to avoid a catastrophic default, even if the debt limit is not raised. And now we have published reports that Treasury officials are making private phone calls to senior executives at big banks, informing them that the Treasury will not allow a default, will choose not to default on our bonds. Well, I think they shouldn't default on our bonds, but it's all well and good to tell the big banks this. How about the ordinary Americans who are wondering, what about their savings that are invested in Treasuries? What about Social Security payments? This kind of uncertainty, I think, is unacceptable, and that's why we've introduced a bill which is called Ensuring the Full Faith and Credit of the United States and Protecting America's Soldiers and Seniors Act. We now have over 35 co-sponsors in the House, and the bill would simply instruct the Treasury Secretary that in the event, however unlikely, that the debt ceiling is not raised prior to August 2nd, that they make certain obligations priorities so that they will be paid in full, on time, and without delay. Those three priorities are interest on our debt so that we will not default and will not plunge our country into some kind of economic chaos, number one. Number two, Social Security payments, because millions of senior citizens, including my parents, depend on Social Security payments. They've earned that benefit by virtue of the payments they've made. We can and we must honor that obligation. And payroll for active duty military personnel, because those who are risking their lives for us deserve this certainty. The fact is there are far more than enough resources to make these payments. As this chart illustrates, the green bar reflects the total revenue, minimum total revenue that's expected to come in the month of August. The combination of interest on our debt, active duty military pay, and Social Security benefits would add up to less than half of the revenue that we're going to take in the month of August alone. These aren't my numbers. These come from the Bipartisan Policy Center. And they illustrate clearly that we have the ability to pay these items and many others. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not suggesting that this is a desirable outcome. I'm not suggesting that this bill is a substitute